Hi, I'm Hannah, and yes, you're right, she's a lot. Let's get into ADHD and my ADHD, big time. So, why did I get an ADHD diagnosis at 33 years old? I really feel like I've had ADHD all my life. It's something that has been quite prominent throughout my childhood and then especially into my adulthood. It was something that I'd very much learned how to navigate and how to deal with myself. It wasn't something that I felt like I needed the validation for until I went on Married at First Sight. And for me, the show really made me realize that I wanted that conclusion of learning more about myself. I genuinely believe that my Married at First Sight journey, I was very much misunderstood. I felt very much misjudged. And I felt like my kind of too much, too out there personality was being took the wrong way. Whereas throughout my life, before Married at First Sight, it had always been something that had been in the back of my mind, but it was always something that I was just kind of navigating through and I was fine with it. So I decided to go and get my ADHD diagnosis in September of 2024. We finished the show in April 2024, so it was a good few months after. And I just wanted that validation. I have come across a lot of psychologists and I've said, I think I've got ADHD, and they're all like, you think? You are riddled. So that was quite clear that I was very much riddled with it. I did really want to try medication. I knew that when maths came out, my life was going to get a bit busier and everything. I was going to be juggling a lot more plates. So I wanted to try medication, but I also wanted to try kind of herbal things. And I'd heard a lot about lion's mane and mushroom coffee and all these other things. So I wanted to try some things like that as well. So ultimately, I ended up getting a diagnosis, and my diagnosis was quite funny because I actually got 99 out of 100 on one of my tests. And I'm annoyed I didn't get 100, to be honest. Like, where was that 1% that's normal? But yeah, it was very clear that it was something I had, and it was something I was learning to kind of navigate and grow through. When I had my diagnosis, there was a moment, and the psychologist said to me, I did all the tests, and I will go through the whole process of how I got my diagnosis, because I actually went privately, and I'm going to do a whole separate video on how I went about it, and I'm going to try and help other people get that private diagnosis if they are looking for it. But I got my diagnosis. I had to do all the tests. I had to do the online test. I failed the online test 3 times because I got so bored and so distracted, which in itself surely should say, yeah, she's got ADHD. I wandered off 3 times. I fell asleep once as well because I was just so bored. But I got my diagnosis, and I had the chat with the psychologist, and we delved into all of my childhood and my adulthood and things that had happened. And they ended up saying to me, and it was this really sort of pivotal moment in my life, and I got in my car after and I burst into tears because I just felt this weight had just been lifted off my shoulders. And the psychologist said to me, genuinely, Hannah, the fact that you have managed to not only get through life, but you've managed to really thrive in life, and you've managed to go to a really good school, get a degree, build a career. I've obviously, the self-employment and the entrepreneur in me was a big part of my ADHD as well, and made me really realize that it was quite apparent for me, and we'll go into that as well. But the fact that you've managed to build a career for yourself, do the things that you've done with no psychological help, based off of just self-growing and self-learning, they said to me, it's a real testament to your character and who you are and how strong you are. And firstly, what a lovely thing to say to someone. Like, I loved that. I was so grateful. But secondly, it just gave me this moment of like, do you know what, Hannah? You've actually done all right for yourself. And I think sometimes you need that validation to just kind of go, you're doing all right. You're doing really well. You're smashing it. You should be proud of yourself, because we live in a world now where we're quite competitive. Everyone's quite competitive. No one's really kind of like, well done you, rooting for you, yay. And I think a lot of that comes down to who you choose to have in your life. And I have chosen to have really supportive, really optimistic, really positive people in my life that we all egg each other on and we all buzz off each other. But it was just that real moment of this real validation. I felt so seen. I felt so heard. I felt so understood. And I just felt like this weight had lifted off my shoulders, that I finally knew who I was and how my brain worked. And I was so grateful for that diagnosis, so I could then move forward, ultimately leading me to here to see how I can help other people. So how did my ADHD come up as a child? So like I said, I was diagnosed as an adult, and I was 33 when I got diagnosed. But if I look back on my life, there is a lot of times when it was very apparent as a child. When you do your psychology tests, when you get the diagnosis, a lot of it is analysing what you were like as a kid, what you were like as a baby, what you were like as a teenager. and a lot of things came up. The number one thing that came up for me was my report card ever since I was at school. Every single term and every single year, my report card said she could do better if she stops distracting herself and distracting others. And I think if that is like an ADHD tagline, there it is. I was, and still are quite intelligent. Like if I put my brain to something, I can. But I think if I now look at the symptoms and I look back on my childhood, they were very apparent. They are things like hyperfocus. As a kid, I would only really focus on the subjects and the things that I enjoyed. I loved drama. I loved English. I hated science and maths. For me, this became apparent that I am I don't want to say bullshitter because I'm not lying, but I would rather kind of bullshit and flower my way to an answer than a yes and a no. And I think for maths and science, there is a yes and a no and a correct and an incorrect. Whereas English, drama, history, it's more about telling a story. It's more about skirting your way around the subject and around the topic so you get to an answer in whichever way you happen to get there. And that's more me. I'm more words than numbers. So really hyper-focused on the drama. I ended up getting into performing arts when I was younger and I loved it. My sister went to performing arts school, so I followed in her footsteps a little bit. Put me on a stage. I'm clearly fine with it. I went on telly. I'm an attention seeker. I love it. I'm here for it. But I'm very confident in terms of performing and being out there and being on a stage, and I can do presentations and all that kind of stuff. But when I wasn't interested in things, I really, really, really struggled to concentrate. I would get very easily distracted. I would regularly get asked to leave the classroom because I was talking too much. I would regularly get separated from my friends because I was talking too much. And I would get bored in lessons where they would basically just make you sit and read from a book. Whereas I was really, really engaged in the lessons where, like drama, for example, you were a bit more hands-on, you were a bit more up and out your seat and you were doing things. I then went through life and I started to become a teenager and then a young adult. And I was really struggling to find my place in the world in terms of maybe with friendships. I was a bit of a social butterfly. So I used to kind of dip in and out of friendship groups. I never had like a group of friends. I was a bit all over the place. But then in the same breath, as much as in some ways I was a bit gutted that I didn't have this big group of friends, I really liked that I was quite social and I would kind of merge into different groups. I'm quite a people person. I'm very empathetic and I can really read a room quite well, I think. So it meant that I was able to adapt and move around different people and I had different friends in different subjects. I had a friend that I got the bus with, but I wouldn't necessarily go on a night out with. And I had different people. The other thing where it became quite apparent for me, which I've only kind of thought about recently, was the intense emotions. And for me, my trigger was alcohol. So as I started to go to uni and as I started to go out, I mean, I probably went out at like 16, let's be honest. When I started to go out and I started to get drunk, I would notice how emotional I was. So I always used to go, oh, vodka makes me cry. Vodka didn't make me cry. ADHD made me cry. And I would get really quite confrontational and quite arsey. I don't want to say aggressive because I don't think I'm an aggressive person, but I would get quite confrontational and I would get quite heightened when I was drunk, and I realised that that was my trigger. And I would fall out with my friends quite a lot when I was pissed and I was a bit rowdy. So that was one for me. And then, I went through uni. I realised that I did better with uni when I could kind of cram everything in and I would revise really last minute. And it became quite clear that it was something, if I look back on my life, that those were the symptoms that were coming up quite drastically. We then went on to adulthood. How my ADHD then kind of manifested as an adult. So like I said before, I did kind of struggle to find my place in the world in terms of friendship. As I then became an adult, that then became quite apparent when I was then finding a job and a career. I ended up going to a very good school and I went to uni and I got a business degree. I'm actually quite clever, surprise, surprise. Got a business degree and I was very much like, what the hell do I do now? I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I want to be. I ended up in marketing and PR and event management and I loved it. Again, it was very hands-on. It was very creative. It was very imaginative. Big part of ADHD is the ambition and the drive and the creativeness. So that was a big part of what I loved, but I hated corporate world. Absolutely hated it. Number one reason, I hate authority. I hate being told what to do. I hated that I had to go and sit at the same desk every day at the same time and do the same job and get the same met and have the same people telling me what to do. And I just hated it. I hated it. I knew I didn't want to be a corporate robot that just turns up and does as they're told. I was so miserable. I found corporate very negative. I found it very draining, and everything was like, you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, you've done this wrong, instead of like, oh, well done you. And I hated that I was only getting paid 9 till 5, but I actually rocked up at 8 and I didn't leave till 7. And I hated the hierarchy. That is one thing. If and when I ever created a big global company where I have multiple staff, I would 100% go down the road of sort of Google, or I know Social Chain that Stephen Bartlett created was very much about the people and making sure they were happy and they were well looked after and there wasn't this massive hierarchy, and that would be something that I would really work on. So yeah, struggled to find my kind of place in the world in terms of career. This ultimately kind of led me to having a bit of a midlife crisis, should we say, at 25, halfway, quarter life crisis at 25. And I thought, bloody hell, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't know where I fit. I don't know what's going on. Luckily for me, I still lived at home, so my parents were still supporting me. And I ummed and ahed for a while. And I had just been sacked from a job. And at the time, I told all my friends I quit because I was so embarrassed. But now I look back on it, I am more than happy to admit, wholeheartedly, proudly, I got sacked because it wasn't for me. And ultimately, it led me to where I am. This led me to really thinking about, okay, where are you at? You're at a crossroads in your life. What do you enjoy? Where are you happy? Where is your happy place? What do you buzz off? And I realized for me that that was the gym. That was my little happy place where I could put my headphones on and I could escape the world. I always ummed and ahed when I was younger about being a teacher, because I do feel like I'm quite patient to some respects, not all the time, but I am quite patient to some respects, especially with people that I feel like need that patience and need that time. So I felt like I probably could have made a good teacher. However, I parked that idea because I knew there'd be like a little shitty kid in the class that I'd be like, oh, you're annoying me and I have to try and be nice to you and you're pissing me off. So I parked that. However, I then thought, do you know what? Let's do a PT course. So I forked out a hell of a lot of money and I went and did a PT course, and ultimately it was the best decision I ever made, because it ultimately led me to being a personal trainer, being a bloody good personal trainer, and then ultimately opening my own gym, which is what I do now. For me, that is ADHD central. Yes, it's my personality. Yes, it's the big character that I am. But it was me being able to be creative. It was me being able to be entrepreneurial. Nobody was telling me what to do. I had no authority. I was telling myself what to do. I could control my own life. I could really use the ambition and the drive in me to get shit done, get things done for myself. And I knew that every single bit of hard work that I put in, it was ultimately coming back to me. It wasn't going into someone else's pocket. The empathy and the people person in me, which is a big part of ADHD, I could then relate to other people that were going through their own struggles. I like to bring into my gym and my personal training my own life experiences. I have a lot of clients come in and cry on me because I look like the kind of person that they can cry on, because I get it. I understand life. I understand life struggles, and I like to use my own experiences to help other people. I would probably like to call myself more of a life and a wellness coach as opposed to a personal trainer, which is ultimately what has led me here, because I feel like I can use that experience to help others. So all in all, if you think back on my life of 33 years, my ADHD was very much prominent, probably from the day I was born. Now I've got the diagnosis, I've got the little certificate, and I am running with it 100%, because I am actually more than okay with being a little bit different and being a little bit neurologically spicy. So we are now 3 months down the line from my ADHD diagnosis. I am wearing my badge very proudly. I am waving the flag for everyone to see. I also waved the flag so hard, I ended up on national television with it. And I feel proud of the validation that I've got from my diagnosis. I feel proud to say that it's something that I have and I'm okay with it. Yes, it makes me a big character. Yes, it makes me a lot. Yes, it makes me all these things, but there's also a lot of positives that come with it. There are also a lot of negatives that come with it, and there are also a lot of struggles that come with it. So for now, it is about using those experiences to help other people. If you are watching these videos and you've listened to some of those stories and you have related to any of those stories, whether they are from my childhood, whether they are about the career crossroads that I was at, adulthood, finding your place in the world, struggling to make friends, all those little symptoms there, if that has triggered something in your brain to be like, oh, that sounds a little bit like me, or even that sounds a little bit like a friend or a family member, this is now where you start to have that conversation with yourself of like, is it time for me to maybe go and ask for some help or go to the GP? The waiting lists are long, and I appreciate that and I get that. And I am going to try and help people with private diagnosis if they want that. But this is also where you can almost go, do you know what? Do I want a diagnosis, or do I just need to kind of have some resources to look into, have some videos like this that I can kind of feel a little bit more seen and heard and understood? And is it something I really want to look into, or is it something that I can kind of just navigate myself and go through life, which is ultimately what I did. Next up, we are going to delve into the positives of ADHD, being a big personality, being a big character, and learning to lean into those bits of yourself that you should absolutely love. And there will be more of them than you think.